Good morning. My name is Vanessa, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the CA APM Global User Community Webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. I will now like to turn the call over to Mr. Keith Palmer. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to today's APM Global User Community Webcast. My name is Keith Palmer, the Vice President of the APM Global User Community. I'm accompanied this morning by our President, Manish Parikh, fellow Vice President, J.P. Kagan, and Mayor Greening from CA. I have just a couple of quick announcements. First, if you have any questions, please don't ask in the WebEx chat window. Please ask in the Q&A section in the WebEx. This webcast is being recorded and will be posted on the community archives. A future webcast coming up, August 15th. The topic has yet to be determined, will be announced very shortly. We appreciate all the activity on the message boards. Thank you guys very much for all your participation and helping fellow community members. Today, we have an exciting topic for you, APM Best Practices Leading to an APM Service Bureau by Mike Sydor, Senior Engineering Services Architect from CA Technologies. Again, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A section. Mike Sydor will answer all your questions at the end of the session. Lastly, please take a minute at the end of the presentation for a quick survey. It's a great way to get your voice heard. Thank you very much. Mike, it's all yours.
Thank you, Keith. Does everyone see the orange slides now for the Service Bureau? I'm going to assume that's a yes, since nothing's shown up in the chat. Okay. So what I'd like to do today is to talk about what APM means, how we build a practice, and then some points around what we call the APM Maturity Model and one of its organizational frameworks called the Service Bureau. And just for a little more background, I'm part of the SWAT organization for APM, and I'm the best practice lead. So basically, I've been in the business for about 8 years of trying to distill the best practices from everything that our customers and services organizations have been doing. So that's where that stuff comes from, and I'll also give you some other references for material where you can follow up on some points on your own. So we'll get to that when it comes up. So bottom line, what's APM? APM is a technology and a set of processes that basically help people get visibility at the next generation of monitoring. Traditional monitoring tends to look at everything in terms of availability, and the systems that monitor that availability do so, at a resolution of about 15 to 30 minutes. And that's been fine for most of the last 40 years, up until the point where batch operations become the minority and online or interactive transactions become the majority. And in those situations, all these other types of behaviors that we're used to seeing with independent resources aggregate into a very poor user experience, and that's how people are measuring the quality of the IT investment today, is how satisfied are the users in terms of using that technology. So APM is a monitoring technology that helps get us better visibility, but it also starts to really focus on software quality and what are things that we can do across the application lifecycle to make sure that we don't run into a poor user experience when something gets deployed. Another way to look at performance monitoring, just to kind of graphically contrast these two things, is the availability or the systems management point of view is really about up and down states. Whereas when we're doing things with APM, just looking at the number of metrics that a given agent presents actually gives us all the same information that we would get from a system management platform. And then when we start to add in other activities like response time or concurrency or user requests or long-running transactions, we really start to see what's going on in a particular instance lifecycle, where a portion of the application is running, and then ultimately something goes wrong with that application and we get an alert that kicks off. And the real advantage with APM in a very simple way is that we can alert in about a minute, where actually seeing that alert in the trouble management system could take anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes before it appeared. The challenge, though, for most organizations is how to interpret all of this performance data that we're gathering. And that's really what the best practices try to help people address, is to put in a framework of processes that help you digest, prepare, and distribute this information among the people who are concerned about the application performance and the end user experience. So how does your organization learn to exploit metrics? Basically everybody can sell you an APM tool. Very little information is actually out there to show you how you use APM. For many years, this was a competitive advantage as Wiley technology because we could deploy practitioners into the field to really help bootstrap people with their initial experiences with the APM technology. And that advantage is kind of dissipated a little bit, where at least now people can always have a very constructive pilot. But when it gets to the longer-term use, in particular successive deployments, managing staffing, managing the consumption of data, these things are just outside of what the software does on its own, and it's all stuff that has to be addressed with processes. But there's no coursework up until 2010, and again, it's my personal opinion, but when I published my book, it really, tried to put a stake in the ground to say this is where APM begins, and this is kind of like the basic knowledge that you need to have in order to be successful with it. So where does this idea of best practices come from? Well, two of the major influences are the CMMI, which is really about software engineering, but it basically says that you can have a predictable way of assessing the quality of a software organization based on certain types of practices. And a lot of this is around requirements tracking and source code control and validation or testing of the resulting applications. But the bottom line, the industry has pretty much accepted that you can divide software developers, software manufacturers, into different grades depending on the types of characteristics that they represent. And the CMMI defines all those characteristics and allows you to see that, someone who's building software out of their garage part-time, probably at a CMMI of 1, whereas Belcore, which uses, almost ISO 9000 practices for managing software, has a CMMI of 5. And in between, there's all different variations. The second major point is the ITIL, and this is the UK initiative to basically define all of the roles and processes around service management. And performance management is a subspecialty underneath that. However, in our analysis, that performance management is perhaps a little bit too broad, and we really needed to make aspects of what to do with the APM technology kind of specific to the different types of technology that APM can be comprised of. So, for example, we know that APM technology can include instrumentation, which has a whole different way of management compared with transaction capture or filtering, which has a whole different way of management than compared with packet analysis or managing logs. All of these data sources comprise APM, but they each have different lifestyles depending on what the technology is doing. And the best practices really have to reflect that type of detail. And the ITIL model just didn't give us that kind of detail. So, there was an opportunity for us to step in, and that's really where this idea of the APM best practice comes about. The other thing that we had to capture, and not just so much in terms of capability, but in terms of how people decided to employ the APM technology. So in this case, you know, the ways that we kind of classify a management capability is, you know, somewhere between reactive and proactive. Proactive is what everybody's interested in getting to today. The definition is quite variable. My definition, I think, is perhaps the most severe, and it basically says you are doing proactive monitoring when you can detect and eliminate problems from getting deployed to production. And this obviously brings up a big phase, because that detect is often what we call a directed or predictive aspect of the monitoring experience, meaning that I can consistently discover that there's something wrong, and I have some criteria that says that this is not going to be acceptable, but I haven't got the political will yet to say I'm not going to let this, you know, I'm not going to prevent this from going forward to production. And a lot of this eventually does come down to a bit of politics. Once an organization gets enough experience and enough confidence in their use of the tools, they can reliably predict whether or not a certain release of software is going to be successful in production. But the real answer in terms of achieving proactiveness comes when that organization says, you know, if this is not going to be successful, we're not going to put it out there. We're not going to put it out there and see how much of a crater that it's going to produce. And this takes a while to achieve. So when we talk about proactive, it's really something that's on the horizon that most organizations can work to. And the intermediate phase is this directed or predictive monitoring. And that at least shows that we're taking advantage of the technology in a pre-production mode versus, you know, simply reacting to what we see in operations. And at that point, it's a little too late to actually, you know, correct problems that are affecting the performance. Another way to look at this, and a little bit more simple diagram that I've kind of been using for people, is that as we move the visibility back from specific triage events in production and make it more part of the QA testing, or at least the user acceptance testing, we start to build a foundation to allow us to be proactive. And APM visibility, of course, is going to be present along all those different levels. And of course, you know, we're very interested also in what, you know, it's today called DevOps, you know, giving the developer more of these capabilities even before we get into a testing cycle, because we still have a lot of organizations today that really go from development to production and back again without the benefit of a rigorous test of any sort. So we've been working on technology for that for quite some time, and one of our open source products today called APM Studio is specifically targeted at that developer role. But you know, we've got other messages that are coming along with that, so stay tuned to that channel to see how we extend the APM visibility down more into the development role. As an organization matures with APM, their priorities are going to change rather significantly. Initially, it's always about getting the monitoring deployed and being able to show value for a given monitoring implementation. But once you get over those initial hurdles of making sure that you know how to push the technology out and that you can do something useful with it, it really becomes about how can you use the information more successfully, how can you collaborate better, and then how can you get better processes established, you know, get this acceptance criteria put together, and then ultimately make a more reasonable division of labor so that the pace and scale of APM deployments can continue to whatever level they need. So these initial growing and mature levels of an organization ultimately get organized into either a service bureau or center of excellence type of model. And really the only difference between the Service Bureau and the Center of Excellence is that the Center of Excellence is really focused on education and self-service mechanisms and providing kind of a training mechanism internally to help people adapt to the technology or have a, you know, a standard way of asking for and receiving the deployment of the technology, et cetera. So today we're going to kind of focus on the Service Bureau as the main point of an organizational model that will be of interest. So back to that first point, you know, how do we show value? One of the ways that we classically show value is to do something where we say, well, when you can find root cause, that's going to make me happy. That's going to be the point where I'm going to want to invest some money in this kind of tool. However, root cause is sometimes very difficult to achieve, especially if you don't have broad visibility into the environment. So if you've got a complex application that's made up of 5 or 6 modules, but you're only monitoring one of them, you're not really going to be able to do a good job of assigning root cause to a particular type of incident. You will be if it is that module you're monitoring, but if it falls into one of the other 5, you simply don't have visibility. And this can be quite frustrating for people in the first 6 to 18 months of an APM deployment, because they don't have visibility into all the systems they need in order to make that root cause determination. So root cause, it's the first thing on everybody's mind, but it takes time to get the environment ready where it's going to be able to support that type of activity. The approach we take with the best practice is to start focusing on these other things that are going to help affect the pace of acceptance and deployment of the APM technology, which means that we focus first on how do we manage the APM lifecycle. How can we plan and achieve meaningful deployments? How can we tune the monitoring configuration, both for the monitored application as well as the APM environment itself? How can we manage the application lifecycle? Specifically, we use a concept called an application audit to help us understand performance pre-production and then use that information as a baseline to help streamline the triage process when we're in production. And then enhancing collaboration through metric sharing. You know, an easy way to kind of kill an APM initiative is only keep the information for a few selected individuals and no one else sees the benefit of the technology. So collaboration is very much an important aspect of an APM initiative in that we've got to get people interested in the data and willing to consume the data so that we get much broader support for the initiative rather than just as a specialty tool for a few triage people. So getting that information out, deciding what the form of that information is, that's all process related. That's all corporate culture related. But these are all things that are also quite valuable to an organization on that path to achieving that root cause analysis that everybody understands and is looking forward to. So the APM lifecycle is you know, another important element. Most people tend to focus on the plan and deploy. You know, let's get the stuff out there. If we build it, people will come and they'll take advantage of the data, and that's a beautiful thing. But the reality is that people don't often come and take this type of information simply because it's a lot of information and they're not sure what elements they want, and very often they're just not familiar with the variety and types of information that we can present. So generating something like a baseline lets people see here's a subset of information that characterizes the application that different organizations can use to trend or otherwise understand what's going on with that software service that they've invested in. So very much this means what do we give back to the business at the simplest form that lets them understand how to manage their investment in the software and the you know, in the service overall, and you know, are we helping them achieve their business goals? And that information is inside APM. It's just not with a big label that says, oh, this is what you give the business unit. Sometimes you actually have to make a few iterations back and forth to make sure that you've got the right kind of baseline that's going to be interesting for that business unit or some other type, you know, maybe it's a capacity planner, you know, there's all different roles that will generally consume the APM information. But getting them an appropriate baseline, you know, might take 1 or 2 iterations to tune up. And certainly, you know, I'll give you references to point you on how to generally prepare a baseline so you get that starting point done pretty well. So after that deployment, we're in an operations phase. We start building that collaboration, and then there's some tuning that goes on in the environment. Tuning is both to enhance the visibility, to optimize the monitoring configurations, you know, to take care of the environment as the cluster is growing. You know, most of what we measure today in APM is in terms of how many clusters is a given organization operating. And a cluster today is composed of anywhere from 2 to 10 enterprise manager collectors. You know, our largest customers are on the order of, you know, probably 70 to 200 clusters worth of, collectors worth of information, which are then, you know, assembled into, you know, a half dozen or maybe a dozen specific clusters. And that's quite a bit of monitoring technology to keep, you know, keep running properly and keep optimized. So having a practice that's around understanding, are we generating the right kind of metrics? Do we have, you know, appropriate configurations? You know, do we get 100 metrics from one agent or 20,000 from another? How can we start to balance that and get better, you know, efficiency out of the collectors that we're deploying? But the most important part about this APM lifecycle is that once you get to that collaboration and tune phase, things kind of quiet down. And the reason why is that, you know, initially the initial deployment might be 3 or 5 or 15 or 20 applications. And then, you know, 6 or 9 months later, you go through the whole process again and again and again. And this is a very important aspect that we try to address with the Service Bureau model, is to make a mechanism that lets us be in the business of continuous deployment. And it doesn't mean that, you know, we're just continuously deploying agents because that's just a nice thing to do. It's because businesses have different schedules. So we may be ready to deploy stuff for the next 3 months, and we're missing 2 or 3 major business units because they're just not ready to pay attention to this. So a year later, they start to get ready, and now you have to go and do that planning and deployment scheduling. And maybe you don't have the same people who did the first ones. You know, maybe it was CA Services that did the first ones for you, and the people that were looking over their shoulders are off doing something different today. So making sure that you have a reliable mechanism to plan and achieve these deployments is very important to the long-term success of the APM initiative. So I've got a couple slides here to just kind of summarize the details of these activities. You know, generally we have a monitoring needs assessment. You know, how do we select the candidate applications? I always like a model where we, you know, send out almost, you know, an email advertisement saying, hey, we're planning the next deployment phase. Who's interested in coming on board? And you send that out to 200 groups, and if you get 10% returns, you know, you end up with 20 applications for your next deployment. There's nothing wrong with that model. You know, every 6 to 9 months you put out the call, say who's interested to move next, and you get the people that are going to be motivated and interested to participate. The solution sizing, you know, spreadsheet-based, a little bit more mechanical, but the bottom line is you want to make sure that you've got enough infrastructure to support the next deployment increment that you're planning. Nothing hurts a deployment more than finding that you've run out of space. You can't accommodate it on the hardware platform or the cluster configuration that you have initially, and you go out to buy new hardware, and it's going to take 3 to 4 months to get that stuff in place. And then in between means you're going to be running a overloaded environment, and it's going to cause dissatisfaction for everybody, and the end result is quite poor. So it's something to avoid. Scheduling the deployment phase, you know, depending on the types of components, you know, putting out another enterprise manager is not that big a deal. If you got the hardware, yeah, a couple hours later, you've got another EM collector up and going. But if you do that with CEM, you're going to find about a 6 or 8 week delay, simply because it takes that much time to get approval to get the equipment put into, to get it racked properly, to get the appropriate connections made, span ports, that kind of thing. And boy, that again can blow a big hole in your schedule, you know, in terms of getting that type of component deployed. And there's, you know, there's constraints with all the other technologies as well. You simply need to know what they are and make sure that your plans accommodate them. When we look at the deployment planning and execution, the main model we use is what we call a phased deployment, which means that we basically decide to, you know, do a little bit rigorous testing on a small set of applications that kind of represent the overall set of applications in general, and then use that as kind of like a gold configuration to get an initial agent deployed for all the other applications that we're considering, and get that out there and get it running, and then basically handle kind of exceptions coming back where people say, you know, hey, this is working great, but I don't have quite the visibility, or I'm missing this type of resource, and then you go and you deal with those details, you know, kind of outside of the initial deployment phase. This also allows for what we call a post-production as well as a pre-production review, just to make sure that we're hitting the types of capabilities and presenting the types of metrics that the different groups are interested in. So it gives you a little formal checkpoint to make sure that they're getting what they expect, and then you can start planning for the next deployment phase. There's also version management to consider. Obviously we release different versions of the technology as the year unfolds. We're going to be kind of increasing the pace of that deployment as, we kind of move to a more agile type of development model. But the bottom line is what that means for an APM practice is that you always want to be considering the most recent release and kind of a sandbox environment so that you can start to make decisions for which releases you might want to target when you do make an upgrade. So if you're at 8.23 today, which, was the last major release for the 8.x version, and you're evaluating, 9.0, 9.1, 9.4, now we're up to 9.5, and you may find, all right, yeah, it's the capabilities in 9.5 that we're interested in, so we'll start planning that migration from 8.2.3 to 9.5, and then, making that appropriate, putting a stake in the ground to say that's the one you're going to target. But you want to be in a position where you can kind of continuously evaluate it in the sandbox environment, direct agents from 2 or 3 applications to it so you can start to see how it works and see how it operates. And that gives you really the best control about when it's going to be appropriate for your organization to move forward to a new release. When we look at onboarding, which is one of the key Service Bureau subsets that we consider, the main things we're concerned there is being able to deploy rapidly and also to kind of create a self-service model for deployment. So in that case, we're going to give people an agent configuration and let them go through the work of getting access and to the platform, making the changes to the configuration file for the app server startup, and then testing that actually came forward. I mean, that can be anywhere from, 30 minutes to a couple hours depending on the rules and regulation in your environment. But it's not something that the APM team has to do specifically. What the APM team has to do is they have to prepare a reasonable configuration for someone to deploy, and they also have to prepare what we call just a cookbook, a deployment cookbook or run book that basically says, here are the steps you follow to get the agent deployed, and here's how you test it, and here's who you call if there's something that goes wrong, but, here's a couple of ways that, someone can make a mistake, because some of this is hand editing, so there's always an opportunity for some user error, in terms of preparing these configurations. A lot of my customers actually depend on this model because they've outsourced their production environments and their employees can't actually touch anything in production. This is a model a lot of companies are beginning to follow simply because it gives them another level of security, and that's fine. But the bottom line, if I'm going to ask someone from CSC to deploy an agent for me, I don't want to have to assume that he's had, basic interscope training. I need to simply give him a cookbook that says, here are the steps you follow, here's what you do, here's the package you deploy, and let me know when it's done. And that just becomes a much more scalable type of model. We also have to consider things like alert and dashboard validation. Very important to the overall demonstration of value is that when an APM environment is stood up and operations is starting to use it, we need to make very, very sure that when we generate an alert, it absolutely means that there's something wrong with the application. So we have to be very careful about the types of alerts that we generate initially, and sometimes this gets down to basically what I call, availability, performance, and capacity. Operations very, very interested in the availability alerts, not so interested in performance and capacity alerts. The reason why is that when I get a performance alert, it's really an indication to the application team that this thing is growing bigger than what they had sized it for. And that doesn't mean you reboot the system. It means that we got to start planning what we're going to do on the next release because we're starting to hit our upper threshold. And in those circumstances, the operations team really doesn't care about the performance alert. However, an availability alert means that that service is down, and we've got lots of very reliable ways to generate that. And that's what we want to make sure. We tend to call everything we do on dashboards, an alert. It's really an event transition. But whether we take those event transitions and elevate them to an alert or not is the decision that we have to make from the APM team. But if we use the word alerts too freely, people are starting to see many thousands of alerts and they start to panic. But that's something that's easy to avoid. So there's a few other considerations for operations, but I don't want to take too much time on that bit today. Similarly for collaboration, the main points that you want to understand is that we start with the concept of baselines. We start with validation, and working with the business to help us validate when we're seeing the right kind of things and when we're seeing the right kind of circumstances. And that can sometimes be business transactions as well as alert thresholds. But the bottom line is we need that collaboration to make sure that we get an optimal monitoring configuration. The main thing we're building toward is what I call, what everyone calls an SLA, but here the A is not availability, it's for agreement. It's about performance and capacity. It's about a trading relationship or a contract between, your company and another company to provide a data service. And those are what are really going to become the kind of dominant model for how organizations work together. It's already been done a lot in the telco and finance areas. Each vertical, has its own pace of adoption there. But the bottom line for IT to participate in that conversation, we've got to tell them, here are the metrics that we can reliably monitor and which are significant for our application. And then, the business and the legal teams can start to use that information to negotiate that SLA where the A equals agreement. Tuning the monitoring configuration, this is, that ongoing activity that, back to the application lifecycle, we talked about plan, deploy, operate, triage, and then there's that cycle back where we tune. We tune to improve or balance the visibility of the monitoring configuration. There's a whole bunch of points here, and again, I won't go into the full detail on it now. The main point I want to get across is that the quality of the metrics is more important than the quantity. A lot of people get hung up on the idea of having the most metrics on a given agent. They want tons of JMX, or they want tons of PMI, they want all these different things. The bottom line is that the best practices actually show you the techniques to identify which metrics are significant, and also to help you validate, are these other metrics actually providing any value? The main issue I have with JMX and PMI metrics in production is that they're primarily configuration values. They don't change, but they take up space in terms of, taking up space in our cluster, taking up, resources in terms of how well we can respond, in terms of workstation response, how the graphs are updated, the number of alerts that we can generate at any time. These are all going to be affected by the metrics load that's coming into a platform. So if we need a lot of specific metrics, we absolutely have mechanisms to get that. But you do want to go through and periodically check to see who's got some really heavy configurations, and of those configurations, are the metrics actually helping them do anything? And if they're not, they're a good opportunity to turn off, and now you're going to get some additional capacity to help you support another application or another deployment phase. So all these things boil together, and this is our kind of current version of that APM maturity model. It actually has 12 dimensions. We've only focused on the major 4 ones that are here, and we basically use this particular graphic as almost a scorecard. So as you guys, assess what you're doing in your organization and where you are, basically, if you've got something substantially implemented and successful, then you make that green. If it's not, you make it orange. And if it's completely not on your radar or otherwise not supported, then you make it red. And that's basically how you can end up with a rather, a quick scorecard on what to do. The major areas, the implementation experience is pretty obvious. The APM skills is, the main area that we focus on in terms of the best practice. And obviously, deployment planning and sizing is, a key foundation element. But along with that is the rapid deployment, the application audit, performance tuning, and triage. And I mean, that's pretty much what everybody wants to do. But these are specific processes. The technology is just a tool, and the architect gives you a plan. In this case, I'm the architect. The plan I'm giving you is you build competencies towards these specific skill sets, and then you'll end up with a more functional APM enterprise. The third dimension, where it's about visibility, is just about where in your environment you've got monitoring technology deployed that you can use to generate baselines. I'm never too particular about the technology. Of course, we always like to see a lot of CA products, But the bottom line is when a technology can generate a baseline and that baseline is something that can be shared with other stakeholders, then we've got a tool that can participate in APM. And as I said earlier, if you want to achieve proactive management, you have got to do the monitoring earlier, meaning that we're just not talking about, production monitoring. We're talking about overlooking, the performance testing, overlooking the unit testing to make sure there's not something funny or unexpected going on in the application. A lot of behaviors that cause problems in production are kind of obvious even when you're doing a simple test. So this isn't a situation where you've got to go and have licenses to do 10,000 unit testing, 10,000 user testing cycles or things like that. I'll generally be able to see performance problems with, even a manual test, but typically anywhere from 10 to 50 user tests, and you can start to see degradation. And then you can do some other tricks like constrain the type of platform that's being used in order to force particular saturation or failure modes to occur. And there's just a whole bunch of strategies along that. The fourth dimension that we focus on is that collaboration, and again, this is a very reliable way to assess the overall maturity of the APM practice. It's whether or not the data is being shared. It's not often, but I would say pretty frequently I run into basically what I call a data landfill. It's a data warehouse for performance information. Couldn't be anything more heartbreaking, in my opinion. But the bottom line, if no one's consuming the data, you're in trouble because those consumers are what are going to help fund and maintain the APM initiative going forward. Once they get attracted to the information and they see the utility of the information, they become dependent on it, and that keeps the initiative going forward. So when we build an APM practice, and I'm giving you background on this because the real magic in our practice is that we can help you do it or you can do it yourself. But basically, we hit each of these dimensions in a sense. Focus on basic triage, focus on how we can leverage a QA environment, enhance that deployment mechanism, focus on collaboration and how we share information. And then we've got really a set of exercises that we take you through, and we basically repeat this sequence 3 times. We mirror this in what we call the phase deployment model, because there we try to deploy 10%, then we deploy 30%, then we deploy the remaining 60%. And it gives us kind of like a playground to go through these activities and elevate them a little bit. So we generally tend to do things in terms of a good, better, best. Good is enough to get started, but as quick as we can, we're going to go and hit that again to improve it, to get it to better, and then ultimately to best. The processes that we develop are going to be, in the best case, 60 to 90% re-engineered from existing process. Nobody likes to create something from scratch for sure. All good engineers try to reuse what's out there. And a lot of the groups that are potential consumers of APM information already have valuable processes. So we want to understand what those processes are and start to incorporate them as part of the APM practice. And what that ensures is we're going to be able to give them data and information that they're used to seeing because it's going to be fitting into their practice rather neatly. So anything that kind of takes the pain out of getting access to the information, that's going to be useful to these other stakeholders. So it's very important to keep their interest and their way of doing things in mind as we prepare these baseline and these other processes to make sure that we're giving them data in a format that they can take advantage of. So when we talk about the Service Bureau or the Center of Excellence, there's not a huge lot of difference there. The main idea that we're borrowing from ITIL is this idea of a service catalog. You basically, if you're thinking about a Service Bureau model, you basically want to sit down and say, what are the services that I want my Service Bureau to deliver? So, and these are kind of just in the natural order of things, but not necessarily the order that you would put them in place. But if you're going to be planning additional deployments, you have to be able to do a monitoring needs assessment, which means you've got to be able to send out to someone a survey or a scorecard that says, hey, tell me about your application. Tell me about its characteristics. Tell me about what your goals are. Give me that information on this form, and then I can help you decide which technology is going to be most appropriate to help you meet those goals. And along with that is usually enough information, and I can give you guys samples of what these survey sheets look like, but enough information to do the initial sizing to make sure that we're not going to oversubscribe our environment as we're inviting these people to join the initiative. The rapid agent deployment, the application audit, performance tuning, I mean, these are kind of the mechanisms, you know, kind of the bread and butter of a service bureau. Performance tuning being, you know, where you go in and help them do the analysis on the performance information for a given application and use that information to let them, you know, have maybe a couple change iterations, either for configuration changes or code changes on the application to prove that they're going to improve the performance or correct a defect that they're, you know, bothered with. And then, you know, things like incident or outage analysis, more focused towards production activities, capacity management, which could be a catch-all for a whole bunch of different things. You know, these are elements that make up what your service catalog potentially could be. And there's other ones that people will add in, you know, kind of depending on the culture or needs of the specific organization. So having that service catalog in mind is important. And then it's really a roadmap of how you achieve it. And that's really where our experiences kind of come to bear. We've already taken a lot of customers through these kind of processes, so we know what's the most agreeable and achievable sequence of activities to undertake that consistently result in a fully functioning service bureau. If we looked at just a generic program, and this is a full service bureau program, basically it's like 1 to 2 days of lectures with, you know, 2 to 3 days of other follow-on activities. You know, for example, you know, doing a triage on an enterprise manager is one of the first triage experiments that we do. We do it this way because often the applications haven't been brought under management yet, so we can't even use those as a good example. But the real test of someone's ability to triage is not that they can triage the application that they've been supporting the last 5 years, but they can walk in and triage any application they happen to see. And this is a model that, you know, really follows our own, you know, SWOT practice, our own triage teams. You know, this is how we build up skills in this particular area. Our advantage is we never know what the applications do. You know, so that's allowed us to be very objective in how these techniques are put together and how they can be effective. But basically, this is like, you know, the college catalog, you know, treat each week as a semester, whatever it is. But most organizations really can't sit there for 8 weeks and go through this. So we always tell people it's going to be 8 weeks over 6 to 18 months, depending on the pace at which the organization can absorb this stuff. And that's, you know, that's the model that really comes from our experience. Here are the things that we can focus on. Here's how we know that the team is making progress. And then once we've got everybody through a certain gate, here's the next set of activities that we're going to layer on to help them go forward. The main artifacts that you guys get to use, and these are, I don't know if I put them on the community site yet, but we can definitely circulate them to the team so everybody can digest them. I've been developing a set of cookbooks which are specific to the CA tools. So how do you do a health check of the EM environment? How do you do an application audit? How do you do a skills assessment and maturity assessment? And then I've also got a white paper which is about, you know, finding out which metrics matter or collecting baselines. These are all in addition to the book, but the major difference is that the book is vendor neutral. And this was just a requirement that legal, you know, shackled me with when I wrote the book. They said, yeah, we're real happy. Marketing wants you to have this book on APM. You're going to help the business. It's great. Don't say anything about our products. And that's a pretty tall order, but, you know, with the emphasis on process that the best practice has always been, it really wasn't that difficult a barrier to achieve. But it's sometimes frustrating for folks to say, all right, here's the CA book on APM, and where's the chapter on CEM? Well, you know, we actually have a health check that should be coming out for that in the fall, specific just for the CEM environment. But so these cookbooks are specific to the CA tools. They're kind of written both for a customer, a pre-sales, and a consultant as a type of audience. So there's stuff in there that talks about how you prepare for an engagement. But really, when you're in a Service Bureau model, you're going to be doing pretty much the same stuff. You know, what are the questions you want to ask before you commit to doing something for, you know, another stakeholder, another business unit, something like that. If we just look at the book here, I made a little joke for today, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe. Not as severe, APM, bring your towel. But the bottom line is there's three major parts of the book if you haven't seen it. The planning, which is more about the business justification through the pilot type of activities. The implementation, which talks in details about the different deployment strategies, the key processes, and the service capabilities, you know, that should be established. And then whether you do, you know, kind of a standalone, a Service Bureau Center of Excellence is an organizational goal. And then a practitioner's guide, which really kind of goes into the details of how we do solution sizing, how we do an application audit, the different types of triage, and then how to build and maintain a firefighting organization. So this combination of resources, this is the tool set that, you know, kind of lets you guys do it the way you want. In our experience, people that are thinking about a Service Bureau are actually going to break down into 4 different flavors. The onboarding practice is the more typical one that basically says that we want to be able to bring on new applications in a very workmanlike fashion. We'll have a minor, you know, or minimal test environment available, but we want to make sure that we can take care of deployment, push stuff out, and get people, you know, interacting with the information more efficiently. The other major alternate to that is what we simply call a deployment practice. And this, unfortunately, is what a lot of people were doing over the last couple of years. They'd make a great effort to plan the deployment of APM, and there was never any follow-up to how that information was actually going to be used or employed. So there was a team came in to take care of the deployment, and then that team disappeared once the job was done, and then the environment really struggles, you know, to get enough inertia to be successful on its own. A major alternate that we have, you know, amongst our customers is for a QA practice or a triage practice, and this is really whether or not they have a mature capability for testing. When they do, they tend to do most of what they want from APM in the QA environment, and they have very minimal production monitoring. And then at the other end of the spectrum are people that are really focused on the production monitoring, really focused on triage, don't do any testing, and that's really the model that they want to live with. Triage practices tend to move towards a little bit more QA activity simply because it makes for a more reliable and a more consistent triage if you have better baselines available. But basically, you know, service bureaus can take on a couple other variants, and you know, what that means is it's just going to be a subset of that 8-week program, you know. So typically a QA practice is about a 2 to 4 week type of program. And again, the estimates here is not saying, you know, I want everybody to go up and call CA services for this. It's just to give you an idea of how much work would be required on your side if you were to undertake this activity on your own. This is the model for the onboarding service catalog, and in that 3 phases, the initial, growing, and mature. And what's highlighted here in the bold are the major competencies that are going to be achieved. So on the right side, you know, when we look at the APM gauntlet and pre-production review, incident review, this is absolutely what everybody wants to do with APM. But to be successful with APM, you really need to start at the initial phase and make sure that you can achieve that rapid deployment competency. And the test is real easy. It's basically, can you give the cookbook to somebody who's not part of your team and have them successfully deploy an agent? And repeat that 3 times. And once that happens, you know you've got that rapid deployment. You know you've got all those elements understood. You've validated it with, you know, those other third parties outside of your team, and you know that that's going to be a reliable tool to help you scale. When we look at the growing criteria, we're really looking at 2 things: the application audit, which is probably 80% of what you want to do in terms of collecting the right kind of baselines, getting a good dashboard, getting a good report, identifying the KPIs, really everything that you want to do to get the good utility of information about an application. And along with that has to be the APM capacity management competency, which is the major application that you need to take care of is the APM environment itself. It has performance characteristics. They're really pretty well known. We've got a whole doc set that talks just about the performance management and capacity management for the enterprise manager. And the cookbook kind of takes you through, you know, a good, better, best approach to assessing whether or not those environments are operating correctly. And when they're not, what you need to do to make some adjustment in it. And then with this foundation, then you're in a position to finally achieve that, the good APM gauntlet that we call, which is the acceptance criteria. Acceptance criteria typically evolves through what we call advisory, which means, hey, I see a problem, but I know you're not going to do anything about it, onto required, hey, I see a problem, I need you to sign off on this, and otherwise I'm not going to do anything about it. And then to exclusionary, which is, hey, I see a problem, and you guys are done until it's gone, all right? You're off the train of production. This seems to be very severe, but in my experience and experience of, quite a handful of customers who have reached that level, it means, for one customer, about a 300% reduction in severity 1 incidents in operations over a 6-month period. So yes, if you stop bad applications from getting to production, you will have a better production experience. It's a big bit of politics to get that done. So we look at that gauntlet, that's really a political, evolution to get to that phase. But ultimately, that's what you need to have happen in order to have a good experience. And of course, there's other strategies I talk about both in the book and the different papers about how you can also achieve that through having like a gold environment, where applications that follow a best practice approach can live in the gold environment, and applications that don't have to go to the other environment. And then you see very quickly the number of incidents in the other environment tend to skyrocket, and the number of incidents in the gold environment go down. All you're doing is selecting the well-behaved or at least the well-managed applications from the whole bag of applications that your company has, putting them in one place, and that guarantees you're going to get a much better, overall incident rate than compared with the, the applications that are less better managed. So when it comes down to it, if you want to kind of self-evaluate where you are, these are the couple questions that I always ask people kind of tongue-in-cheek. It boils down to what exactly can you do with APM today? Can you build dashboards? Can you build reports? Can you deploy agents? Can you deploy collectors? Can you do custom agent configurations and tracing? And then one of my favorites is your APM environment stable? One easy thing for folks to do is that, hey, you're tracking incidents on every application in your environment except APM. The bottom line is that when you can show that there's a pattern of people complaining about, hey, I can't access my workstation, I'm not seeing gaps in my data, you have to have a mechanism to, control those things, to keep track of them. And when you don't, you basically end up with situations where all of a sudden now, the APM cluster goes down 2 or 3 times a week, and everybody's wondering what went wrong. It's always obvious in the historical data what went wrong. It's just that if you don't have anybody taking a look at it, that that foundation is going to cripple everything else that goes forward. There are specific things that we do in terms of how we help customers plan for Service Bureau activities, and these are often largely independent of whether we do it or they do it. And really today, I'd probably split about, or actually maybe 2/3 customers do it on their own with just advice from us versus 1/3 where we might actually help them, either develop part or full of a Service Bureau. But basically, we assess your skills, we survey the applications, we do the solution sizing, we do the overall enterprise visibility assessment, which kind of catalogs all your tools. And then from that, define the processes and the overall evolution of what that the APM Service Bureau is going to be. It's just bricklaying at that point from our experience. So I've left a scant few minutes for questions, but I think it's okay if we go over a couple minutes. And I haven't been watching the Q&A to see if anything's popped up there. but I'm okay for questions. Or does somebody have to, open the bridge more?
Yes, sir. At this time, I would like to remind everyone, if you would like to ask a question, press *1 on your telephone keypad. We will pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. Again, to ask a question, press *1. And there are no questions at this time.
All right. So, Keith, who's in charge?
So we have another question that was entered through the chat, and the question is, would you mind commenting more about cookbooks?
Yeah. So the cookbooks, are available under non-disclosure. So I think we can put those onto the community site because everybody who's a customer is already under a non-disclosure agreement. And it's only because there's product-specific information, and it's same as with the documentation and other things like that. But I certainly could put the cookbooks up on the community site, and then, you guys can start the digestion there. The cookbooks and that one white paper, understanding which metrics matter.
Same question goes with the monitoring survey, how to obtain.
Yeah, I can put the latest version of the monitoring survey up there. It's also available, or used to be available on the APRESS website. All the artifacts for the book were hosted on their site at one time. I haven't actually checked to make sure that that's the case, but I could put the I can put the stuff we talked about. I can put that all up on the community site.
So, Mike, can you see the Q&A?
Yeah, I see. I got to make a bigger window. That's what I need to do. Oh, no, I double-clicked. I got the wrong thing.
Azim is asking if the broadcast will be available as a recorded webcast. The answer is yes. It's being recorded and should be available later, probably as early as tomorrow on the APM community website.
Yeah, and the book is available on Amazon.com. Just search for APM and maybe Sydor, S-Y-D-O-R. And you can also get it in PDF format from the APRESS site. Actually, I think you might be able to do digital, like a Kindle version from Amazon. But I can't sign those. I can't sign the paper book if I ever run into you.
Another question from Vin. We have been using CA APM 8 plus years and always have other APM vendors come in for demo. How to fight this kind of situation?
Well, every vendor that comes in for demo means a couple days of free lunches. So I don't know how much you want to fight that. But, yeah, I mean, I think it's okay that people continue to, look at other technologies. We like to make sure that we're the market leader in terms definitely of having an enterprise scale solution and, trying to be the market leader, the thought leader for this kind of thing. But the smaller vendors, are able to move sometimes more quickly and can have some interesting functionality. I don't have any problem with you guys learning what that is and then asking for it. That's the cool thing. They don't give me demos. And regards other product lines that use the same program, not everybody, you know, I mean, we have some 200 plus products, but, you know, for CA Spectrum in particular, I'm pretty sure they have an assessment practice, you know, so that they can at least assess what a particular organization is doing and, you know, sizing and you know, sizing validation and things like that. But, you know, the real benefit we've had with APM is that because it was so easy to install, we really spent the bulk of our time during pilot activities trying to figure out customer problems and really understanding how to use the tool. And a lot of the other CA tools, you know, aren't really intended for that kind of application. You know, if you look at a capacity planning tool, you know, yeah, there can be some good best practices around it, but capacity planning is pretty well known. You know, you can find books on that. You can find books on you know, network monitoring architectures. You just can't find books on APM, and that's where we've just really tended to focus. It's been a bit of a challenge to get that expertise released because, you know, initially it was a tremendous competitive advantage to have that pool of experience. And initially, even when we were delivering Service Bureau and Center of Excellence programs for people, they were still under extreme confidentiality, and we had very few people talking about it until, you know, actually almost 5 years ago, whereas the first time we would let people present at CA World about what they were doing with APM and how they were achieving proactive management. That still remains kind of an issue. You know, everything that we publish is sooner or later turns up as part of our competitors' message. Again, you know, I think it helps keeps us honest, and yes, it can be annoying to have to evaluate all these other products, but the bottom line is that, you know, your feedback back to us in terms of what you're seeing and what looks interesting for you, you know, that's still the valuable interaction that we want to preserve, because we continue to invest in the product and continue to make it do new and interesting things.
Mike, I'm not sure if you saw the questions from Vin Liu. We have been using CA APM 8+ years. Have you seen that one? And always have other APM vendors come in for demo. Oh, I think you did. And then there's
no, I was talking to that one a little bit.
And is there an organization to help customers achieve the APM Maturity Model?
No, I mean, we don't have a dedicated organization. You know, it's kind of a kind of a la carte. You know, if you talk with your sales teams, they can generally, you know, bring myself or one of my other colleagues in to do some of the initial assessments, or we'll supervise the pre-sales people that are doing some of the assessment, because basically when they start to make recommendations about, you know, what are the next steps for a given organization, we tend to just oversee that and make sure that we're getting a consistent message and consistent, you know, language around, you know, the potential service offerings or program map that results from that activity. But we don't have a dedicated team, you know, that is going out. I mean, we do have, you know, what we call a sales center of excellence, which does do customer satisfaction interviews and things like that, and they've been adopting some of the assessment practices as well. But you know, 5 years ago we had a dedicated program to deliver it, and in the last 5 years it's kind of you know, become more of a, you know, use in case of emergency, and you know, we're kind of dependent on people to pick up the book and self-train or send questions in, and you know, we'll give them guidance that way.
Thank you, Mike. One question from Arlette about CMMI and ETL in their relation with APM. You mentioned those two in one of your slides.
Yeah, so the main relation, you know, the CMMI, has this idea of 5 levels of maturity. And they have a list of criteria for each level, and what those organizations would look like. And we have a similar concept, except it's actually more, it's 12 dimensions. We focus on the 4 major dimensions. We used to try and give people a score 1 to 5, and the dimensions is a far more realistic measure. So, other than the fact that, an organization can be categorized and the industry can accept that categorization, that's the main benefit that we get, in terms of following some of the ideas from the CMMI. When we look at the ITIL model, it's really providing a lot more definition on, service management is the big container, performance management is the next level underneath that, and then APM is a level, that we're proposing is underneath performance management. There are aspects that overlap. I haven't done a detailed analysis lately to see exactly where those overlaps are, and we certainly don't say that this is, an ITIL certification or anything like that. But one thing that was very different from ITIL, compared to a best practice approach, that ITIL takes about, a 2 or 3 year commitment to start to see stuff. And what we're doing with the best practice is we're doing stuff on the order of 2 to 3 weeks before you see a result. And sometimes it's only 1 or 2 weeks. It depends on which particular activity we're looking for. But what we allow for in the program is that, once you've achieved it, then it's, to get operational experience and do some more with that. And that's where we kind of get, the overall time. But everything that we're doing in a best practice approach is absolutely, screening towards a very, very fast time to value. And again, that's very different than the ITIL approach. A couple years ago, and I say in my own imagination that ITIL responded to my consistent barbs about the duration of their activity, and they came out with an ITIL Lite, which brought it down to about 18 months for the implementation to start, seeing some value. But, it's really a different approach altogether. It's a big standards effort, where ours is a big demonstration of competency effort. And it's just much more tangible when you can say, here's what I can do with the technology, as opposed to, here's the 49 forms that I have and I've only got the first 13. What does that really mean? Well, it means, we've got 33 to go or 36 to go.
Hey, Mike, thanks. I think there is one question left in the Q&A from Bill Liu. He says, we have been using CA APM 8+ years and always have other APM vendors come in for a demo. How to fight this kind of situation?
Yeah, and I already answered that one a little bit.
Okay, all right, never mind. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Take the lunch, and then what you see interesting, call us up, let us know, and then we'll try and find a way to put it in the product.
Okay, great. If there's any other questions, if not, I think we went over a little bit, and I think we will thank Mike for his great presentation and introduction to his service and best practice for APM users. And I think we'll let everyone go back to their task, and please ask everyone to mark their calendar for the next webcast that is planned for August 15th, same time, and the subtopic is to be announced. So we'll see you then. Goodbye, everyone.
All right. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for everyone's attention. Have a good day.
Thanks, Mike.
This does conclude today's conference call. You may now disconnect.